Me and my brother both read Chosin to the Sea because it was only a few bucks or something on Amazon, and for the longest time, like if you've even been watching since we were Sad Husband Shortbox, we've been talking about at least being interested in reading Richard's comics before Jawbreakers. And so I bought Chosen to the Sea so that we could see what his comics were like before Jawbreakers, and also to fill in. We
Well, in particular, it's a historical event. I wanted to
Yeah,
see how he was going to treat it.
yeah, to how he would write a comic about a real life situation. In this case, the Korean War, the Forgotten War, and what insights maybe he would bring to it, or in this case, sort of confirm our confirmation bias that he would bring some kind of idiocy to it. Thing is that it says
It's really
story
not
by him and
confirmation
some other
bias.
guy.
It's really not confirmation bias if you're just right.
Yeah, well, I mean, fucking for us, confirmation bias is being right. But anyways, I think Matt Iglesias is the other guy that worked on the book with him. So I don't even know who to blame necessarily. But the comic isn't terrible, anyways. We read it, and it's like, I mean, I didn't think it was terrible, but I did think it was basically irrelevant, and
I was expecting it to be worse.
yeah. Um, but it wasn't anything very relevant or important or interesting. It was just a sort of fictionalized account of something that probably happened to some people in the Korean War. It's like, oh, they're in a village in some kind of fucking, some shitty Korean village where it's
At
just
first, I
snowing all
thought
the
it was just
time.
somebody's cabin. I didn't even see there isn't a village until you see the Chinese showing up to burn down all of it.
Yeah, and you're not even there's not much context or indication. So if you're coming into this, the whole Forgotten War thing, it's like, well, what is the Forgotten War? What was it about? Who were we fighting and why? None of this shit is answered. None of this shit is even addressed or talked about in the comic. Maybe it's in some of the fucking giant walls of text that front load the comic that you're supposed to read, but I never read those things, and they should never be a requirement in any comic. Um,
I do wonder how much of it is true. How much of the story is true?
yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's like they show a picture of some girl and her younger brother or something that was like picked up as refugees, and that's the whole comic is a girl and her younger brother run away from the village, like their parents probably killed or
It kind of
whatever.
reads like a travelogue of like, oh no,
Yeah,
I don't
but a
know what.
vague one of just kind of generalized stuff. Like they go past some blown up fucking vehicles. They go past some dead people. They hide from some soldiers, and then they get to like a United States an aircraft carrier or ship or something that picks them up to take them to America. And the comic just ends right there.
Well,
Um,
also the Chinese attack a few times.
yeah,
And it's like, oh, the Chinese attack, and then the Chinese attack, and it's just over. And it's like, okay, time to move on.
yeah, and that's it. And it's a very brief comic. I mean, as far as I know, it was like 20 pages, although it could be 40. But it's about 5 pages worth of content. Like we went over what we would do differently if we were writing it, but that's all like every time we read any of these people's comics, we're like, here's how we would fix it. And it's like, I'm not gonna fucking tell them what
Well,
they
I mean,
should
there's
have
two
done.
things. There's two things you can do here because first off, this was apparently funded by the Department of Defense.
Yeah, and
Uh,
we actually went into this on in a previous series of videos about Richard C. Meyer's prior Kickstarter campaigns. In fact, do I have the name of the? Okay, it's called Richard C. Meyer's old Kickstarter campaigns, and there's 3 parts. They're on our subscribe star. So if you've been subscribed to us, or if you're subscribed to us now, if you just scroll down a bunch, you should be able to find them. Um, but yeah, we talked about his other. In fact, those are really good videos. I can't stress enough how good those videos are. But um, this is in a way just a sort of companion follow up to that, where we finally have read one of those. But I plan to actually read some more of that stuff, but I wanted to basically cover everything about the comic. And like the one thing I would said real quick though that I would do differently is the whole thing that Chosen to the Sea is about should be just condensed to 5 pages and then skip to somebody else's story and then skip to somebody else's story and then at the end of like maybe 20 and 25 pages, something like that, all of their stories converge where they all end up at the same ship where they're going to escape, something like that. And ideally, base all of it off of real stories. Don't just
Yeah.
fictionalize an account. Do the Preston
In
Poulter,
fact,
if you will.
yeah, that's actually
Fictionalize
the
people's
thing
real life stories.
that's the thing I was wondering. But also, if I was doing this story, I probably might actually do the opposite. But that's assuming everything that happens in this story is true. A lot of it's really not. There's not much effectiveness in the storytelling.
Yeah, it comes off as like cliched, Hollywoodized version of real, like sort of like Wind Talkers, where they took an interesting concept. I remember watching a History Channel documentary about Wind Talkers, and basically all they did was like code decipher. They basically developed a code that was never broken because it was like the Apache language or some shit. I don't know if it was
Native
Apaches, but
American rule, whatever.
it
The
was
movie.
some Native American tribes' language, and they just used that, and they used the actual Native Americans who were like, okay, yeah, we can translate this shit really easily because it's our language. And so they could fucking,
It's also
talk.
apparently a notoriously complicated language or something. But then
But
also in the
also, it
movie,
was
I think
a
they're just like,
language
yeah,
that the
this word means
Japanese,
this, and it's like
it, they were
this.
fighting the Japanese, and the Japanese were completely unfamiliar with it, and even the Americans didn't have to be familiar with it because it was just the Native Americans would just be like, okay, this is the word for tank. We'll use like the our word for eagle for tank, and then we'll
There or
use
something
this
like that.
word for
Yeah,
that and this word for that. And so even if they could break the code, they would still have to figure out what the words mean and why they mean something, something like that. And but the thing is that the movie was like Nicolas Cage camp fucking action flick by
it was
John
John
Woo.
Woo too, wasn't it? Didn't John Woo do this?
Yeah, he directed it, and it's the least John Woo movie you could possibly imagine because it's the most stock bog standard bullshit, and that's
It's
really what
John
the
Woo, but it's
Chosen
also
book
not
reminds me
really.
of.
It's not really exactly respectful of like the tone or the
Or the real
source.
life story. Well, that's the thing is that it's kind of and that's the thing about Chosen also is that it's not exactly an insult or a disgrace to the war dead or the war veterans, but it's not really that respectful because it's not really the true stories. It's just a Hollywoodized, simplified, fictionalized version.
Or I assume that's the thing is I assume it's not the true story. I don't really know, but it doesn't seem a lot of it seems like there's stuff shoehorned in. An American soldier shows up while they're hiding, and he rescues the kids, and then he gets killed, and then the kids move on.
Hmm.
And for me, what I would have done is like actually stop, go back, show some pathos there. Really have you got to have some rumination over like the sequence of events because there's some really good material here you could work with that's just not being touched. It's
Well, yeah.
not being
Also, it's
worked
like
with.
in a real story, you would see at least some thought where like the girl has to explain to the younger brother we can't go home anymore or something like that. None of that happens. There's basically no dialogue in the entire book. This is just a preview of our review of Chosen to the Sea. The rest of it will be available on our Subscribe Star, so check that out in the link below, either the card link or just the Subscribe Star link. Either one. The card link is the most reliable, but check that out and should have listened to Shitty Webcomics.